This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Tonight, we're diving into a topic that every teacher can relate to: efficient feedback. How can we make it work harder for us in the classroom? And why is live marking the solution we've all been waiting for? Stick around as we unpack strategies that will save you time while helping your students thrive.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. I'm your host this evening, and tonight we're diving into one of the most talked about challenges in education: efficient feedback. How can we deliver feedback in a way that is most impactful and time effective? Well, today I'll be discussing how live marking and efficient feedback can offer the solution. We'll be exploring evidence-based strategies, practical tips, and how these can work in the classroom. So grab your notepads and settle in, because we're going to be exploring a few simple but highly effective tools that can help us reduce the feedback burden whilst also boosting student progress. Now, before we jump into live marking and all the practical tips, let's first discuss the core concept and that core concept that underpins everything we're going to be talking about today: how to make your feedback efficient. Because as educators, we know that feedback is crucial to student success. It is one of the most powerful tools that we have to guide learning. However, the question is, how can we give feedback that is both effective but also manageable as well? Now, I was actually really lucky to be part of a learning visit recently where I was actually doing some live marking with my students, and I was lucky because I was going a particular way with it, and I thought I was doing a particularly good job with it as well. And I was. Got some feedback to say that the lesson was going particularly well, but I got some really good feedback as well from the teacher and learning lead who came in and gave me that observation as well. And I will be touching on that and what led me to do this show based around this, because it led me down a route of looking at particular feedback strategies that are evidence-based as well. So that one session, whilst I thought went well and I got feedback to say it went well, also led me down the route of, okay, how can we make this better? How can we make this quite efficient as well? Because ultimately what we need to be doing as teachers is doing the best by our students, but not losing sight of what's best for us too. And that's always going to be really important in these sort of strategies as well. So what I'm going to start by asking is, and just get you to think about this as well, what do we really mean when we say efficient feedback? Often when we think about feedback, we picture mountains of marked essays and homework that we give back 2 weeks later, that later down the line we've spent a lot of time marking for them just to really put it back in their bags when they're done, because the moment has elapsed when the impact of that work is gone. So it also leads to long lists of comments, stacks of paperwork that, let's be honest, just never really seem to shrink. And, many teachers like myself, have found themselves stuck in this cycle of marking, just wondering how we can possibly give each student the attention they deserve whilst also balancing our workloads as well. So the thing is, feedback doesn't, and in fact shouldn't, feel like a burden. It doesn't have to be something that adds to your workload. Instead, it should be something that streamlines learning and enhances the educational process. So, I said what I did, and it was ended up going down this route of let's look at research. So let's look at some research. What I've looked at, and if you've ever wondered what impactful feedback really is, then the work of John Hattie is going to be really important here. Because for those who aren't familiar with Hattie, he's an educational researcher whose book Visible Learning looked at what actually works in the classroom. And one of the things that Hattie found was that feedback has one of the strongest effects on student achievement. In fact, feedback is the most significant factors in improving learning outcomes. So in his research, feedback had an effect size of 0.7, which is considered large. But to put this into perspective, anything above 0.4 is considered to have a significant impact on student learning. So feedback comes in at more than twice that threshold. So ultimately, what we're saying is this is huge, massive. In fact, it means that if we figure out how to provide feedback effectively, we can have a tremendous impact on our student learning. But there is a catch, because not all feedback is created equal. So what I'm going to show you now is the kind of feedback that works and the kind of feedback that doesn't.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
Hey teachers, it's Tom here from Teachers Talk Radio, just dropping in to tell you about Teachers Talk Connect 2026. We are back with our amazing big annual CPD and networking extravaganza in Manchester. It's on Saturday, the 14th of March, and tickets are completely free for teachers. Just head over to ttradio.org/Connect 2026 to grab your ticket today. We can't wait to see you there.
Well, welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. And what I said to you just before that wee break was that what we need to really be talking about is the kind of feedback that works and the kind of feedback that doesn't, because not all feedback is created equal. So my question to you is, what makes feedback effective? Well, in order for feedback to be useful, it has to meet some key criteria. And based on Hattie and Timberley's feedback model, effective feedback is timely to begin with. So it should be given as close to the task as possible. Immediate feedback delivered during or just after the activity is far more effective than waiting days or even weeks after the task is completed. Now, there is an exception to this rule. I must say, we can't, if we give them a formative assessment to do, then of course they need time to, we need time to mark it, give feedback effectively and do it. But when we talk about homework, we're talking about this being quite effective as well. Now, there is a bit of a catch to this as well, because I give homework out and I often give them quite a lengthy essay to do. Now, I often give them a week to do that. And what I used to do was make the mistake of then giving them, I said, give me another week, and what we'll do is I'll give you back then. And so effectively they've been set the homework, and 2 weeks later they get the feedback. that's a problem, isn't it? I mean, it's clearly a problem. So it needs to be more timely than that. So I will touch upon live teaching strategies around what we do, or what I do, shall I say, when the homework is handed in. Now, as well as it being timely, feedback has to be specific too. So it should be clear and focused on the task in hand. General comments like "good job," or "it needs work," or whatever, it doesn't help students improve. And we need to give feedback that's precise and, directly focused and tied to the task, outlining what they did well and what needs improvement. So timely and specific so far. And finally, it needs to be actionable. Effective feedback doesn't just point out what's wrong, it tells students what they can do to fix it. So this leads us to the idea of providing next steps. What can they do to improve? Where the power of live marking comes in. Now, the timely, specific, and actionable are non-negotiables when it comes to effective feedback. Them three things need to happen. Of course, what's wrapped into the whole time, the specific aspect is achievement, what has been achieved and what needs to be improved, as I've said. But the timely and actionable parts are absolutely non-negotiable. So let's unpack these three elements a little bit more. If we start on the timely to begin with. Now, the importance of timely feedback can't be overstated. And, the key thing about timely feedback is that waiting doesn't help. So in a study by Black and William in the mid-90s, yes, I'm going back to the mid-90s here, it's often referred to, or it has often been referred to as one of the foundational studies on formative assessment. They found that feedback delivered right way, so during or immediately after the activity, led to a much higher performance. And this kind of feedback ensures that students make corrections while the task is still fresh in their minds. And this still ties in very much to things that the Educational Endowment Foundation are talking about now in terms of, activating hard thinking. We can't activate hard thinking unless they're given the opportunity to correct their adjustments at the time. So, we're talking about mid-90s, but it just shows you how long we've been talking about this and how the EEF is still talking about this. And okay, they've got more research to add to this, but we've always been talking about the requirements for actionable feedback and timely feedback as well. And then corrections while fresh in the minds is absolutely fundamental. So contrast that with feedback that's delivered days or weeks later. So by then, students have likely to forgot the details of the task and might not even fully understand what was wrong. And I made the mistake of giving them it when they were doing something else. So picture this, okay? I always give homework out last lesson of the week. And, this whole idea of it being timely, just totally, this here is what I was doing wrong. Don't mind being negative if I can tell you how I've corrected that. So I would give homework out on the Thursday. Let's say they've done topic 1 on the Thursday. Their homework is given out that day to hand in next week. So next week they hand it in, whilst at the time they've done topic 2. Now, bearing in mind that they are probably also at that week being given homework back from the week before when they handed that in. So in one given time, in one session, they may be doing 3 topics at once. It absolutely is not. It's not good. Not good. And I stopped doing it for that reason. And again, they've completely forgotten about it. Now, I'm just also thinking about other subjects. So I often look at history because I teach politics. So if I think of a history essay, for example, if a student writes a 1,000-word essay, it only gets feedback after they've started a new assignment. They may not have enough, mental map of the previous work to make the changes you suggest. And it's balmy when you think about it. And this is where live marking comes in. It allows us to provide feedback in the moment, guiding students as they work so they can make adjustments immediately, not days later. Now, you might be sitting there going, hold on a minute, Chris, that's all fine and well. But if we're eating into class time, then that means content doesn't get delivered on time. I hear you. Okay, I do hear you. But what I'm offering to you is a 5-10 minute segment of a lesson that is non-negotiable. You know, that 10 minutes can be done at the beginning of the lesson before you do something, or at the end, or in the middle, or whenever's relevant, whenever's appropriate to you. It might even be done the Monday after, but it has to be done relatively soon. So I do hear what you're saying, and that, we have to eat into our time. But let me ask you this question as a contrast to this. Would you give 10 minutes up in a lesson, or would you give up an hour, maybe hour and a half of your time doing this and not getting the same impact as what you do with them 10 minutes? It's a difficult choice you need to make, but my suggestion is doing it in class, doing that live marking that we talked about. Now, in terms of specific feedback, there is that danger of being vague. And specific feedback is another pillar of this effectiveness, another non-negotiable. So have you ever received feedback like, you need to improve, this needs more work? You've probably given that feedback as well. And you know what you mean by that, and it might be that they know what you mean by that as well. So I have this danger because for my law A level, we tend to do the same structure over and over again. So anyone who teaches law here, here's something that I've made up that you might want to look at. I don't know. I use what we call the plead structure, PLEAD, plead. They make a point, they provide the law, they give the evidence. And, that's the A, they then provide their disagreement to that as well. Because without that disagreement, what we're saying is that the law is perfect. Your point is perfect. But if we add that disagreement, that's well-rounded evaluation that tells us that the law isn't perfect. So we provide the point, the law, evidence, and disagreement. We plead. Now, that's been drilled into them so often that I'll just say to them, structure is missing. Now, honestly, structure is missing. That's too vague. What's the point in saying structure is missing? And I might give verbal feedback to go alongside it, but quite often the structure is missing because of either the P, L, E, A, or D. So which one is it? Is the law missing? Is the evidence missing? Is there more than one missing? You could even just put P, L, E, A, or D, and then elaborate with verbal feedback. But, clearly that has to be there. So when feedback is vague, it's hard for students to know where to begin. And they might read your comments and feel overwhelmed. Mine certainly have. Or the complete opposite. They don't feel overwhelmed. They're just like, okay, right, I'll try and fix that next time, whatever. And so not really knowing where to start or how to fix their mistakes. On the other hand, if specific feedback is clear and targeted, instead of saying this section needs work, say something like, try expanding your evidence in this paragraph, or you're missing a particular law here, or your disagreement isn't coming with evidence. So how do we know that that is an actual legitimate disagreement? And this makes the feedback actionable and helps students understand exactly what they need to do. But specificity doesn't just apply to the context of the feedback. It also applies to the tone and the language we use as well. So in many cases, teachers feel the pressure to provide lots of written feedback. But the reality is concise feedback can be done with oracy as well, and it often works better. The key is to focus on the most important area, give students clear, brief instruction on what to improve, and maybe ask them a question that they can answer there and then, and ask them to write down that feedback on that as well. And, finally, it needs to be actionable, doesn't it? And this actionable is where they come into it, like we've just been alluding to there. The final element of effective feedback should always provide students with a clear, practical step that they that they can take to improve. And we've all seen those essays or assignments covered in red ink pages or in pages of comments that point out what's wrong, but doesn't necessarily give a way forward. And this can leave students feeling discouraged, and they may not even know where to start. So in contrast, actionable feedback offers a solution. It provides guidance that students can use immediately. This is where live marking really shines, because we can offer that real-time guidance. And let's just say a student is struggling with the structure of their essay, like we've just been talking about. Instead of just pointing out that the argument is unclear, we could be saying, think about that argument would be stronger if you start this paragraph with a clear topic, and then followed with specific examples, but asking them to provide the examples and asking them to even maybe provide that stronger start. So it's with actionable feedback, they know exactly what to do. Now, the role of feedback should also reduce student anxiety as well. So these three pillars of effective feedback should reduce that anxiety as well. And actually, guess what? Should actually reduce teaching anxiety as well. So it is worth noting that feedback plays a huge role in student confidence and teachers' confidence as well as motivation from both teachers and students to do more as well. Because poor or delayed feedback can really lead to, feelings of frustration and confusion, as we know. And if students don't know where they can improve, it can be discouraging. Like I said, on the flip side, it can have a huge positive effect as well. And we can actually correct them things right away. And this helps them to develop that growth mindset. And I've often talked about Carol Dweck in previous podcasts as well, previous shows. But, Carol Dweck's growth mindset really is so important to helping the students develop this as well. And for those who aren't familiar with the concept, it is the belief that abilities can be developed through effort and perseverance. Now, if that effort and perseverance is short and little and often, shall I say, then that perseverance is more likely to be present than if it's done over a slog of 2 or 3 weeks. So when students receive that feedback that helps them improve, the feedback like what we said is timely, specific, and actionable, then they can start seeing their mistakes little and often as a learning opportunities more little and often, and they can make them incremental gains more often rather than failures. And I honestly believe that feedback should be a dialogue, not a monologue. And so when we talk about that actionable feedback invites the student into that dialogue as well. And feedback can never be one-way street. It doesn't work. And it's essential to create that environment where feedback is part of that dialogue. It's a conversation, not a monologue between teachers and students. When feedback is a dialogue, students feel more empowered to ask questions, and they will be more tempted to offer suggestions and be less anxious when these questions come at them because they're used to them more. And they will seek clarification and engage in the feedback process. And that's what we need. We need students to be engaging in the feedback process, but in a way that is efficient as possible. So with live marking, this dialogue can happen in real time. So instead of giving written feedback at the end of an assignment, by assignment, I don't necessarily mean, again, anyone who teaches maybe Access, where assignments are very heavily scrutinized and need to be that way, or assignments from actual assessments or coursework. They are different. I just mean, a piece of homework, essentially. And, that's what we talk about when we talk about that. And so when that happens, that assignment needs to be, we can't be waiting for the student to come up to you with questions later. They need to be done there and then, and we need to be guiding them through that process. And of course, this helps create a rapport early on. And if we do this at the beginning of the term, it really sets the tone and sets the culture for how feedback is going to be done. And it can help create that rapport. And, it creates a more collaborative learning environment as well, where they feel that they're a part of it. Because let's face it, the more we engage with students in the feedback process, the more likely they are to take it seriously and, of course, apply it. So, as we wrap up this section, remember efficiency doesn't mean cutting corners. In fact, efficient feedback is all about maximising the impact with timely, specific and actionable advice. And the goal is not to reduce feedback, but to make it more focused, more relevant, and, ultimately, let's be honest, more useful to students. Because when we focus on delivering feedback that actually helps, students learn and grow, and we're creating this culture in this environment where learning thrives. And that's the ultimate aim, isn't it? Without necessarily having to give up your lunches, your breaks, your tea times to do this. So let's look next at why live marking, and let's demonstrate and provide evidence to show you why live marking genuinely works.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
Hey teachers, it's Tom here from Teachers Talk Radio, just dropping in to tell you about Teachers Talk Connect 2026. We are back with our amazing big annual CPD and networking extravaganza in Manchester. It's on Saturday the 14th of March and tickets are completely free for teachers. Just head over to ttradio.org/Connect 2026 to grab your ticket today. We can't wait to see you there.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week says the government must decide whether to cut teacher numbers and close schools or increase per pupil funding as the number of children entering the system declines. The report comes following analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which says the number of children under 16 in England is due to decline by 6% over the next decade. The think tank says the government has so far chosen to protect total school spending in real terms up to 2029, but it points out that policymakers will need to decide whether this remains the right judgment as pupil numbers continue to fall. The IFS report found that during previous historic reductions in pupil numbers, policymakers made what it calls different choices. For example, when pupil numbers fell in the 1970s and 80s, there were cuts to teacher numbers. In the 2000s, when pupil numbers declined, there were actually increases in the number of teachers. A researcher for the IFS said that whilst closing a school can be problematic for local communities, maintaining school numbers as they are might not be the best for pupils either, as some schools might struggle to offer a full breadth of curriculum. The TES magazine says that teacher recruitment is turning a corner and that positive ITT data should be welcomed by the sector after a decade of grim recruitment stats. The article says that this year's census shows just over 32,000 people starting initial teacher training, an 11% rise on last year. Crucially, 99% of the postgraduate target has been met, up from 69% the year before. Recruitment to STEM subjects has exceeded the target for the first time since targets were introduced in 2019, with physics up 36%, computing up 44%, and maths up 16%. Across secondary subjects from art and design to PE have met or surpassed goals. Secondary recruitment overall still falls short of the overall target, but the direction of travel is positive. The article cites the role of financial incentive and says increased bursaries and the expansion of postgraduate teaching apprenticeships have widened access. Pay rises have also mattered. A better narrative about teaching is also emerging. Bridget Phillipson talks about it as a career alongside medicine, public leadership and social service, as work that shapes communities. Speaking positively about the profession, the data suggests, makes all the difference. Schools Week reports on a new legal duty that will be introduced for councils to notify schools when a child is placed in temporary accommodation. This was announced as part of the government's child poverty strategy. Statistics suggest that around 31% of children in the UK are living in relative poverty, with more than 172,000 children living in temporary accommodation in England. The notifications would go to health visitors and GPs alongside schools, which government says would help agencies provide extra support. For schools, this could be extra pastoral support, breakfast clubs, after-school activities and homework clubs. The long-term ambition of the strategy is to reduce the number of days lost at school for children living in temporary accommodation. For full details and union reaction, see Schools Week. LBC says family hubs across the country will have a dedicated SEND specialist. The Best Start hubs will offer a range of support to local communities, such as speech and language sessions for toddlers, specialist parent groups and baby groups. Councils are being asked to recruit the specialists for each of the 1,000 family hubs being rolled out from April next year. The Department for Education also announced councils will have to prioritise the neighbourhoods most in need for family hubs to access their share of £500 million being invested into the hubs. It has set an ambition for 70% of the hubs to be located in the most disadvantaged 30% of communities. Funding for SEND interventions in the hubs will be confirmed in due course and will be in addition to the £500 million for the hub rollout. More details on LBC online. Finally, in Scotland, the Daily Record reveals the country's top secondary schools, and there is a new winner. Douglas Academy was crowned top of the league with 91% of pupils leaving with 5 or more national fives, 81% with 5 or more hires, and 34% with 2 or more advanced hires. This is a 5-place rise since last year in the league table. One school is reported to have leapt an impressive 61 places up the table since last year. The 10 best schools for academic excellence are also listed, as well as other awards for Best Scottish Independent Secondary School. Full details on the Daily Record website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Well, welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson, and thank you very much for joining me. Well, in part 1, we talked about efficient feedback and why it's so important. So let's dive into why live marking works as well as a solution. So to understand this, we need to turn to the work of Dylan Wiliam, one of the most influential researchers in the field of formative assessment. His research has had a profound impact on the way we think about assessment and feedback. So it's absolutely worth unpacking it here. So William's work has consistently emphasised the importance of formative assessment, the kind of assessment that happens during the learning process. And of course, I've been talking about that as being part of during the learning process. I don't so much mean summative assessments. And I certainly don't mean assessments where they need to give more meaningful feedback on, is a more lengthy process like access and mock exams and such. So it's during the learning process rather than it's completed. So, and you've guessed it, live marking is a perfect example of this. And it's a perfect example of formative assessment in action. And the core idea behind formative assessment is to inform teaching and learning as it happens. So, rather than waiting for an end of term exam or final project, which we of course need to do, but we should also be informed by how well students understood the material through this live marking as well. So let me break it down and tell you what it's all about and why it's so effective. Well, the formative assessment is the key to real-time feedback. And Dylan Williams defined formative assessment as assessment that is used to inform teaching and learning while it's happening. It's designed to give immediate feedback to both teachers and students, and it's so that learning can be adjusted on the fly. The goal is to improve student performance by actively engaging with the learning process and making timely interventions. So in contrast, traditional summative assessment like final exams or essays usually tells us how students performed after the fact. Whereas formative assessment, however, is proactive. It's about shaping that learning experience, and that's exactly what live marking is. Feedback given while students are actively engaged in a task, allowing us to guide them towards improvement in real time. And, Williams' research shows that formative assessment can have a significant impact on student learning. And one of his key findings is that feedback during learning is much more effective than after the learning is complete. In other words, if students can receive feedback while they are still working through a concept or a skill, they are more likely to make improvements and retain that information. So the 4 principles of formative assessment are, to understand why live marking works so well, it's important to know why Williams' key strategies for effective assessment work. And, these are clarifying learning intentions and the success criteria. Huge, absolutely huge. So it's about making sure that both students and teachers are clear about what they're trying to achieve. Now, I did a show a couple of months ago around rewarding learners, and it's the same thing in that learners, if we're going to hand out awards to learners for excellent, resilience or excellent efforts, then they need to really know what that criteria is to begin with. And it's the same for formative assessment as well. So it's trying to make sure that they're clear about what they're trying to achieve. And if students don't understand the goal, how can they reach it? If they don't know what the bar is or what their bar is, how can they reach it? So live marking works really well here because it helps clarify why the student is on track towards meeting those objectives. So, for example, in my politics class, it might be that they include a key thinker, but unless they really explain why that key thinker is relevant to the point that they're making, whether it's an argument for or against, they're just really dropping in a key thinker without really making any meaningful impact to their answer. So clarifying the success criteria early and saying you can only use a key thinker if you associate it with an ideology and attribute it to either an argument for or against. And if they just say, Karl Marx said this, blah, 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 and that's it, then that blah, blah, blah becomes, well, okay, therefore this is an argument for or against because. And it really helps move them on so that when they do the next paragraph, they can instantly improve that. Why would you wait a week to tell them that? Why would you wait a fortnight to tell them that? Tell them there and then. So as well as clarifying the learning intentions, we also need to engineer this effective classroom discussion as well. It's about active learning, so getting students to think critically about what they're doing and why. So with live marking, we're facilitating real-time discussions with students. So instead of marking after the fact, like I said, why wait a week or fortnight? We're engaging in students, with a conversation about their work while it's in progress. And this really helps deepen their understanding. Now, I'll come round, this works, by the way, really well with a whiteboard. So it might not be that they're writing on a piece of paper, so it's so little you can't see it. You might just give them a paragraph to write and say, okay, you've got a paragraph. You need to, and as I said, I've set out the success criteria. So you need to include a point, include a key thinker, and explain why that key thinker is relevant to your point, or why that key thinker serves as an argument against your point as well. Okay, 5 minutes, go. All right. And we're engineering that effective classroom discussion, because what I can do is I can come around with a pen or a rubber in some instances. And, part of the criteria is, this is the culture. If you get it wrong, I'm going to silently, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but I'm going to rub out what you've said if it's wrong. Rub it out, start again. Especially if I know that you're going to get it right the second time. It might be that there's two key thinkers to get wrong one. Or it might be that I don't rub it out, but then I put a question mark next to it and say, can you kick that on? Or I might even write, so what? So whatever it is, we're going to get them going. And, as well as, so I've said 2 so far. So as well as setting out the success criteria and, engineering effective classroom discussions, we also need to make sure that feedback moves the learner forward as well. So this is at the heart of live marking. Rather than simply pointing out their mistakes, which I have just done, by the way, I've just said, this is wrong, or if I've rubbed it out, or I've put a question mark on it saying you need to kick this on a little bit. I have done that, but it's not just about it's effective feedback gives them actionable steps. So if I put a question mark next to it, we might have developed this, like I said, this culture before where I'll say to them, question mark means you've got to think about something else as well. Or me saying so what means that you're either having to think about, key arguments for or against or something. And you can that goes back to that setting the success criteria as the first one. Part of the moving forward is I give them a key that means that they're not quite finished with what they're doing. So we're immediately helping the students identify the areas that need attention. And if we're doing this all the time, if we do this not every lesson perhaps, but once a week, or if we're doing it with homework or whatever, I can go around and instantly make them connections. They don't have to wait ages to hear that feedback when really they should be doing it there and then. So we have to make sure that is truly helpful. Now I'm going to do a little bit on looking at art as well as whiteboards. I'm going to mention a little bit about how I use visualizers to do this as well, but we'll get onto that. The fourth thing is to activate students as owners of their own learning as well. So I set the success criteria, we have them discussions, we use a key to move them forward, and then they own that. They take that information, they own their learning. So one of the ultimate goals of formative assessment, again, is to encourage them to take responsibility for their own learning. So when feedback is delivered live, it's much easier to guide students towards self-reflection and self-correction. And they can apply feedback in real time as well, which gives them that independence and then that critical thinking as well. So ultimately, all 4 of these things are rolled into one thing that I do with my whiteboards. I will say, okay, I want you to write out a paragraph. It's not just politics. It might be my law class as well. They know the structure, that if they're providing for my law A-level, if they're providing evaluation, they need to provide a point, a law, evidence, and disagreement. So that is the criteria. You are not going to achieve the full criteria unless you provide a point, legislation, evidence, and disagreement. We have that classroom discussion around that as well. So we have them real-time discussions at the time. Make sure that move forward by me making a note saying law, evidence, or whatever. And they take that ownership and do it there and then. And they're going to be taking ownership every time they do that, because if it happens the next time, we do it again. And we do it again, we do it again, we do it again. And we might do that 2 or 3 times a week, 2 or 3 times a session. It all depends on the type of session we're doing, doesn't it, of course? Because it could well be a feedback session. It could be a feedback session. It could be 10 minutes based on homework. Who knows? So that that consistency needs to be there, but it might happen once a week. It might happen once a session. It all depends on how you think that they should get that effective learning as well. And live marking needs to work with a feedback loop. Now, you hear about feedback loops all the time. So let me tell you what I mean by this as well, because Williams' research also stresses the importance of this feedback loop as well. So a feedback loop is when students act on the feedback that they receive and make them adjustments. And that feedback loop ties into the 4 things I mentioned earlier. And they continue to make progress. Live marking is a key part of this loop because it allows us to interrupt that cycle of poor performance and really get to the heart of what it is before it starts to solidify. And if we're starting this culture early in the year, then we can not exactly going to stop poor performance, we get that, but we're going to find ways to try and interrupt that cycle of poor performance where we can. So imagine this scenario. So a student is working on an essay and halfway through, you spot a misunderstanding in their argument. It can happen, especially A-level. It's really difficult. So instead of waiting for them to finish the essay, you can provide them with that instant feedback. They will get used to you interrupting their essays if you're interrupting that poor performance. Now, I would have killed for a teacher to stop me from making a mistake before it happens. I would have loved that. And if we can redirect them to the correct approach. So instead of, there's ways to manage this in a class full of people, of course. And you can do this with a pen, so it can be non-verbal. It could be that student is quite happy for you to go, nope, do this instead. Whatever. We need to disrupt that cycle of poor performance when we get the chance to. And it allows them to immediately apply that feedback and continue working on task with a clearer understanding. And the type of real-time feedback encourages learning in the moment, doesn't it? And as opposed to passive feedback, which simply points out errors, it empowers the students to take ownership of their learning, adjust their approach, and just see them immediate results. And feedback needs to support learning, not just evaluation as well. So one of Williams' main points as well is that feedback should be about learning, not evaluation. And too often we think of feedback as a way of evaluating a student's performance, marking their work to determine how well they did. But feedback, especially when it's given in real time, is about supporting learning. It's not a judgment on how well a student performed, but as a tool to guide them for further improvement too. And live marking, especially if it's done verbally, aligns perfectly with this philosophy because it's not about simply giving a grade or a score, but identifying them areas for improvement. Now, if you're doing this verbally, you know your learners and you would know how to verbally provide that. Some students want it really quite direct and very happy for them to tell that. Some want it to be done in a feedback situation where it's a little bit, a bit of a sandwich, shall we say. You can insert whatever phrase you want into there, but they need that. But if you're having that conversation, then you're still doing that with them, aren't you? And it's focused on growth rather than evaluation. And William does emphasize this, and the feedback should be seen as an opportunity to guide the student through a process of improvement, and it should be about learning and growth as well, where students are likely to engage with it effectively. This is why whiteboards are really, really good for this. And this is why Visualize are really good for this as well. You have to get the students buy-in because you have to put you have to get their work and put it onto a visualizer where everyone can see it. Of course, it can be done in a way where it is confidential, nobody knows, but sometimes they will. And again, if the student doesn't agree to it, doesn't work. So visualizers, you need that buy-in. But by the end of, if you get the visualizers working early, students are throwing themselves at you to give you their work. And they'll say, do me next, do my feedback. And you put it on and students can chip in and be like, well, I think that's wrong. I would have done this. Okay, great. Next staff students, you do this. Can I have my go now? And they get really used to it as well. So it's not just me doing this. We're doing it as a group. And we're not just telling students what they did wrong, it's about helping them to move forward as well. So, it's not just what they did wrong, this is what I would do as well. And it works really well if you've got that classroom environment where students are very happy to share that as well. Of course, you've got to set ground rules around how we give feedback. It has to be constructive rather than negative, that sort of thing as well. And it's all about the powers of questioning as well. And part of Williams' work is that questioning is used as a tool of formative assessment rather than just telling students what's wrong. Ask them questions as well. So we've talked about learning and growth, but ask them then questions to help them think about it. And it's a strategy that pairs beautifully with live marking. So instead of saying this argument doesn't make sense, you could say, what evidence could you do to strengthen this argument as well? And this helps the student engage more actively with their own work as well and engages with their critical thinking. They're not just passively receiving feedback. They are actively working through the feedback process as well. And it helps them take ownership of their learning. When they're asked questions, they're more likely to reflect on their own thinking and make improvements. And it also helps them develop the skills of self-assessment as well, which, as William points out, is a key aspect of becoming that independent learner. And the reason why independent learning is really important for A-levels is because they'll do a lot of this at home where we're not there. We can't be at home with them telling them what to do. So their independence is really important to have the confidence to do this sort of thing from home as well. And it is live marking is a form of differentiated feedback. It is a great thing because the importance of tailoring feedback to individual student needs is so essential, and live marking helps us to do that if it's in real time. So if we've got a student working on a particular concept, we can provide more detailed and specific feedback that helps them through this issue. On the other hand, if we're working with a student who's progressing well, you can offer more challenging feedback as well, pushing them to deepen and understand their learning. And it may actually be that student could be helping other students as well as part of that targeted feedback. So really, to summarize, Williams' research is all about looking at live marking being used as real-time feedback, and it's also fostering this idea of self-reflection, not self-correction. So self-reflection and self-correction, not just evaluation. So in short, live marking isn't just about giving feedback. It's about actively supporting learning, growing students to think about their work, and to help them take ownership of their progress. It's a strategy that works because it taps into the most effective aspects of formative assessment, marking feedback, making feedback as well for more timely, targeted, and transformative learning that is needed for our young adult learners. And this part really delved deep into dealing with Williams' research, and I actively encourage you to look into it because it looks at how live marking is such a powerful tool in the classroom, and it provides evidence, practical strategies, and additional evidence around how we can get students and yourself engaging in extremely effective feedback.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
Hey teachers, it's Tom here from Teachers Talk Radio, just dropping in to tell you about Teachers Talk Connect 2026. We are back with our amazing big annual CPD and networking extravaganza in Manchester. It's on Saturday, the 14th of March, and tickets are completely free for teachers. Just head over to ttradio.org/Connect 2026 to grab your ticket today. We can't wait to see you there.
Well, welcome back to the Late Late Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. We haven't got very long left, so I just want to really quickly address the workload issue, because I've heard a few people talking about how this is all great, but doesn't that just add to the extra planning that you have to do? And does the workload issue actually get addressed doing this? And we all know that giving feedback can be time consuming, but I think by shifting to live marking, we actually reduce our workload in the long run, because here's what we're doing. We're addressing immediate concerns that you can, spend time fixing later in class. Students do get better self-reflection, meaning they need less follow-up feedback, and you do get quicker at identifying them common errors, which means you do end up later spending time on repetitive feedback. Now, I do think that when you are giving this feedback, you still need to make comments on it, because these, and what I mean by comments is you might need to make a note somewhere else, because if we have comments written down somewhere, then that will help inform our learning later. And we can even start arranging seating plans around students that are making the same mistakes, or we have, we can actually set up, we have group profiles around looking to identify them problems early on with other topics, because it might be a different topic, but one student might never put evidence in, or never put laws in, or never do this and never do that. So you can set up a group profile where we're actively saying, right, before we set the success criteria for you is laws, you for evidence, you for this, and really focusing in on that. So over the course of the year, they really have a big problem if they're not addressing them concerns, because you're doing it 2 or 3 times a week. So yes, it could be the workload could add to your planning, but at the same time, the planning should sort itself out as well if students are making the same mistakes. So I actually think it comes full circle, this. And it might be workload at the beginning, but look, everything's workload at the beginning. You plant that seed early, you will get some excellent feedback and some excellent results. So that does bring this does bring us to the end of the show, by the way, and I really hope you feel inspired to try out live marking in your own classrooms and use feedback more efficiently. Now, you will find me on LinkedIn. My name's Chris Wilkinson. Please tell me if these strategies have worked for you, and if you want to come on the show next time and tell me a little bit about it, please get in touch. Please do. I would love to hear from you. So Chris Wilkinson on LinkedIn. You can also find me on X, which is Chris_W1987. Please get in touch if you would like to be a part of my show next time, or if you would like to discuss teaching strategies with me around live marking and how it effectively has helped your workload better. Please feel free to do so. And remember that it doesn't have to be time consuming. It's about providing timely, specific and actionable feedback which can help students and ultimately you remember in real time. Now, this is my last show before Christmas, so I would like to thank you once again for tuning in and always keeping in touch with me as well, as great teachers always we do. And I want to wish you all the very, very best for Christmas, all the very best for the new year, and we'll see each other after the new year for some more excellent teaching. Until then, have a very Merry Christmas and a very happy New Year.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.